Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Hey everyone, get ready to dive deep because today we're all about Agile Retrospectives. And no worries, this is not your typical boring meeting rundown.
Definitely not.
We're going all in with Agile Retrospective, second edition, the book by Esther Derby, Diana Larson, and David Horowitz.
Oh yeah, this book's great.
It's packed with practical advice to help teams make the most of those reflection sessions.
And you know what's really cool about it? The authors actually used an agile process to write the book itself.
Whoa, meta.
Totally. They adapted and iterated chapters based on their own experiences, even dealt with crazy things like surgeries and the whole COVID thing.
Talk about walking the walk.
Right. They really lived it.
Okay, before we get lost in the meta-ness of it all, let's get back to basics.
Sure.
For anyone who's new to this, what exactly are Agile Retrospectives, and why should our listeners care?
So picture this. You're on a team, everyone's working hard, but you keep hitting those same roadblocks, those unproductive patterns.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Agile retrospectives are like hitting pause, a dedicated time for the team to step back, reflect on what's working and what's not.
Okay, so it's not just complaining.
No, it's way more than that.
It's about finding solutions.
Exactly, and figuring out how to improve together.
Got it. But time is always a factor, right? How do these retrospectives actually save us time and frustration in the long run?
Think about how much time gets wasted when teams repeat the same mistakes, or they're stuck with these inefficient processes.
Ugh, so much wasted time.
Right. Retrospectives help you catch those patterns early on.
So you can course correct.
Yeah, and prevent those small issues from becoming huge headaches.
That makes sense. So it's like preventative maintenance.
Exactly. And when the team is working smoothly, morale goes up, productivity skyrockets, everyone wins.
Okay, I'm sold on the why.
Good.
Now, how do we actually DO a retrospective?
Yeah.
The book lays out 5 key phases.
It does.
Let's break those down.
Absolutely. The first phase is all about setting the stage, which is more than just booking a room,
Right, it's got to be more than that.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels safe to share their honest thoughts and feelings.
Psychological safety, that's crucial.
It is, and it's about establishing some ground rules like this cool technique called focus on, focus off.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So the team decides what kind of communication they want to prioritize, like asking questions versus making statements.
So it's about setting the tone.
Yeah, for a more positive and productive discussion.
That makes sense because if people don't feel safe, they're not going to open up, right?
Exactly. You can't have a meaningful conversation if everyone's holding back.
Makes sense. Okay, so once you've set the stage, what's next?
Then comes phase 2, gather data.
Data, so it's not just sharing feelings.
Feelings are definitely part of it.
Right.
But it's about capturing both the objective and the subjective.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think facts and figures like deadlines met or bugs fixed.
Okay, so the hard data.
Yeah, alongside how the team felt about things, what went well, what could be improved.
I see, so data doesn't have to be dry and boring.
Not at all.
It can actually capture the human side of the story.
Absolutely.
So what are some interesting ways to gather this data? I'm picturing spreadsheets and pie charts.
Well, hold on. It doesn't have to be all spreadsheets and charts.
Okay, good.
There's a much more creative approach.
I like the sound of that.
The book talks about a technique called timeline with color-coded dots.
Ooh, color coding.
Yeah, you visually map out the key events, from the period you're reflecting on.
Okay, I'm following.
And then everyone uses colored dots to represent their feelings about each event, green for positive, red for negative, and so on.
That's brilliant. It's like turning a timeline into an emotional heat map.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got all this data. Now what?
Now we move to phase 3, generate insights. This is where you connect the dots and dig deeper.
To figure out why things happened the way they did.
Precisely. It's about understanding those root causes for both the good stuff and the not so good stuff.
So not just identifying problems, but understanding the why behind them.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting.
Ooh, I like interesting.
The book talks about this technique called circles and soup, and it helps teams navigate those blame-filled situations.
Oh, we've all been in those meetings.
He uses a simple metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Are we in the soup together, or are we outside the circle pointing fingers?
I love that.
It helps shift the focus from blame to finding solutions.
Okay. Blame is definitely something we want to avoid.
For sure.
So we've set the stage, gathered data, generated insights. What's next?
Phase 4 is decide what to do. It's about turning those insights into action.
Ah, so it's not just talking, it's about actually doing something.
Exactly. We prioritize what needs to change, make a clear plan, and most importantly, assign ownership.
Accountability. It's one thing to talk about problems, but another to actually fix them.
Right. And the book recommends tools like the force field analysis to help with this.
Okay, tell me more about that.
It's a way to visualize the forces that are pushing for change and those holding you back.
I see you can make a more realistic plan.
Exactly. It's like weighing the pros and cons before jumping in.
Makes sense. So we've got our plan. What's the final phase?
Phase 5 is close the retrospective. It's more than just saying we're done.
Haha, right? There's got to be more to it.
It's about summarizing those key takeaways and making sure everyone's clear on what happens next.
So closing the loop and making sure the hard work actually leads to change.
Precisely. But I know what some listeners might be thinking.
What's that?
We're just too busy for all this.
Yeah.
Or retrospectives are just boring meetings where nothing gets done.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
But that's the beauty of Agile retrospectives. They're super customizable.
Oh, so you can tailor them to your team.
Absolutely. It's not about adding another meeting to your schedule.
Right, right.
It's about making those meetings valuable and engaging.
So working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes choosing activities and techniques that work for your team.
So find what resonates.
Yeah. They even give an example of a facilitator who used music.
Music. Now that's thinking outside the box.
It can be way more dynamic than your typical meeting.
I'm starting to see that. And, this doesn't just apply to software teams, right?
Not at all. These principles of reflection and improvement can work for any team in any industry.
So any team can benefit.
For sure. The book even has an example of a non-agile sales team that used retrospectives successfully.
So regardless of what you do, there's value in taking time to reflect and improve.
Absolutely. And speaking of different teams, let's talk about the unique challenges of remote and hybrid teams.
Yeah, those virtual environments can be tough.
They can. Communication and collaboration get trickier.
Definitely.
So how does the book address those challenges?
That's a great question. I'm all ears. So we're back, still diving deep into Agile retrospectives. I'm really starting to see how powerful this process can be for any team, especially those working remotely.
Yeah, remote work definitely adds its own set of challenges.
Before the break, we were talking about how the book, Agile Retrospectives, gives some really practical advice for those remote and hybrid teams.
Right, like how to keep everyone feeling connected and included, even when they're not physically together.
That's so important. So what are some of the key takeaways there?
The book really stresses the importance of being super intentional about communication.
Communication, always key.
It is, and especially when you're not all in the same room, it's easy for things to get lost in translation.
Right, because you don't have those subtle cues you get from body language and facial expressions.
Exactly. So the book suggests being extra clear about things like expectations, deadlines, making sure everyone's on the same page.
So no room for ambiguity.
Right. And it also talks about the importance of creating those casual interactions like virtual coffee breaks or online team building activities.
So it's not just about getting the work done, it's about nurturing those human connections, even in a virtual environment.
Absolutely. Finding those ways to connect beyond just the tasks at hand.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of Agile retrospectives, and we've touched on how to adapt them for remote teams, but what about those of us who are actually facilitating these sessions?
That's a great point. Being a facilitator comes with its own set of challenges and responsibilities.
For sure. So what are some key things to keep in mind to make sure the retrospective is successful?
That's where this book really shines. It walks you through the entire process, from setting the stage to closing it out.
Step-by-step guidance. Nice.
Yeah, and one of the most crucial things they emphasize is separating the process from the content.
Okay, hold on. What do you mean by process versus content?
Think of it this way. The facilitator is like a guide, leading the team through the steps of the retrospective, making sure everyone understands the goals and how to participate.
Got it. So that's the process.
Right, the content is the actual topics being discussed, the team's experiences, their ideas, their solutions.
So the facilitator is responsible for how the conversation happens, but not what is being discussed.
Exactly. And that neutrality is super important for creating a safe and trusting environment.
So the facilitator shouldn't be pushing their own agenda.
Definitely not. The book really stresses that the facilitator should avoid injecting their own opinions, especially early on.
It's about letting the team own the content.
Absolutely. The facilitator's role is to guide the process, ask clarifying questions, summarize key points, and make sure everyone gets a chance to contribute.
It sounds like a delicate balance, almost like being a conductor of an orchestra.
That's a great analogy. You're not playing the instruments, but you're shaping the overall sound and flow of the music.
And just like a conductor, the facilitator needs to be prepared.
Oh yeah, preparation is key.
It's not about winging it.
The book talks about having clear instructions for each activity, being able to explain things concisely, and being ready to adjust the pace based on how the team's feeling.
So being adaptable is crucial.
Definitely. And they also stress paying attention to those nonverbal cues, both in person and virtual settings.
Like reading the room.
Yeah, are people engaged? Is anyone disengaged? Are there underlying tensions? A good facilitator can pick up on those signals.
Speaking of signals, what about those awkward silences that can happen in meetings?
Ooh, those could be tough.
How should a facilitator handle those, especially in a retrospective where you're trying to get people to open up?
This is where the book gives some really interesting advice. They actually encourage facilitators to embrace those silences.
Really? Embrace the silence.
It might sound counterintuitive, but they say those silences can be really valuable.
I'm listening.
It's in those moments of quiet reflection that new ideas can come up. People might feel more comfortable sharing something they wouldn't have otherwise.
So resist the urge to jump in and fill the void.
Exactly. Give the team that space to process. Let those aha moments happen.
Makes sense. It's about creating space for those breakthroughs.
Right. And it might feel uncomfortable at first, but trust the process.
Okay, but what about the flip side? What if things get heated? Someone starts dominating the conversation or even gets angry.
That's when those strong facilitation skills really come into play.
Conflict resolution.
And the book doesn't shy away from those tough situations. It provides strategies for de-escalating conflict, redirecting that negative energy, and keeping things productive even when emotions are running high.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to those heated meeting moments.
We've all been there.
So what are some specific ways to handle those gracefully?
One technique is to acknowledge the strong emotion, validate that person's feelings. You might say something like, I can see that you're really frustrated. Can you tell me more about what's causing that?
So you're diffusing the tension by showing empathy.
Yeah, and then you can gently steer the conversation back to the process, the goals of the retrospective.
It's finding that balance between acknowledging emotions and keeping things on track.
Exactly. Another challenge I've encountered is managing time effectively during retrospectives.
Oh, I feel that. It's so easy to get sidetracked.
It is, and the book has some practical tips for this.
I'm all ears.
First off, they emphasize having a clear time box for each activity.
Set those boundaries up front.
Yes, and stick to the schedule as much as possible.
But what if the conversation's really flowing? Do you just cut people off?
Well, that's where those facilitation skills come in again.
Right, right.
The book suggests using visual timers or even sound cues to signal transitions.
So it's not so abrupt.
Yeah, and if a discussion needs more time, you can always adjust the schedule. Just be transparent about those changes.
Flexibility within structure. I like that.
It's all about finding that balance. And, it's not just about managing the group's time. It's also about managing your own energy as a facilitator.
That's a good point. These sessions can be draining.
They can be, both mentally and emotionally, especially if you're dealing with conflict.
So how do you stay grounded and energized throughout the process?
That's such an important point. And the book actually dedicates a whole section to self-care for facilitators.
Oh, that's great.
They remind us to take breaks, stay hydrated, be mindful of our own well-being.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And they even offer some techniques for those moments when you, as the facilitator, might feel overwhelmed.
Like what?
Things like taking a step back, doing a quick breathing exercise, just to regain your composure.
It's like having your own mini retrospective in your head.
I love that. Okay, we've covered a lot about facilitation, from psychological safety to those tricky situations that can pop up.
It's been a lot of information.
It has. So before we move on, I want to make sure our listeners have those key takeaways.
Summarize it for us.
Absolutely. When facilitating an Agile retrospective, remember to separate process from content. Create that safe and trusting environment. Be prepared and adaptable. Embrace those silences. Handle conflict with grace. Manage time effectively. And don't forget to take care of yourself.
That's a great checklist. Let's break those down a bit further, starting with separating process from content.
So as the facilitator, you're focusing on the how, not the what.
Right, setting the structure.
Exactly. Asking clarifying questions, making sure everyone participates, but resisting the urge to give your own opinions or solutions, especially early on.
Let the team do their thing.
Exactly. And creating that safe and trusting environment goes hand in hand with that neutrality.
It all comes back to psychological safety.
It does. It's about setting ground rules,
Yeah.
enforcing those rules, and stepping in if someone's dominating or being disrespectful.
Because if people don't feel safe, they won't speak up.
And we want everyone to feel comfortable sharing their perspectives.
Makes sense. Okay, what about being prepared and adaptable? Tell me more about that.
It's about having a plan, knowing the activities, but also being ready to adjust based on how the team's doing.
Finding that flow.
Yes, and don't be afraid to experiment. Find what works for your team.
Okay, I'm with you. Now remind me about embracing those silences.
Trust me, those pauses are golden. Give people time to think.
Don't rush to fill the silence.
Exactly. You might be surprised by what emerges.
Okay, now for those tougher moments, how do we handle conflict?
Remember, acknowledge those emotions, validate people's feelings, and then gently redirect the conversation back to the task at hand.
Empathy plus redirection.
Exactly. And lastly, don't forget about time management.
Time boxing is key.
It is. Use timers, be clear about transitions, and adjust the schedule if needed.
Okay, I'm feeling way more equipped to handle those facilitation challenges now.
Great. And what's really resonating with me is that this isn't just about leading meetings. It's about fostering a culture of continuous improvement.
It's about that growth mindset.
Yes, embracing that agile mindset of inspect, adapt, evolve, not just in our work, but in how we work together as a team.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive, but there's still so much more to explore. When we come back, we'll be unpacking our toolbox, diving into specific activities and techniques for each of those 5 phases we discussed.
That sounds good. Let's take a break and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Agile Retrospectives. I'm excited to get into the nitty-gritty of actually putting these ideas into practice.
Yeah, let's get into the toolbox. The book's got tons of activities for each phase of a retrospective.
Okay, perfect. Let's start with setting the stage, since that seems to be the foundation for everything.
Absolutely. If you don't get that right, the rest can kind of fall apart.
Like building a house on sand.
Exactly. One technique I found super interesting is called ESVP.
ESVP? What's that stand for?
It stands for Explorers, Shoppers, Vacationers, and Prisoners.
Explorers, shoppers. Okay, I'm intrigued, but what does it actually mean?
It's a way to gauge how the team's feeling coming into the retrospective.
Ah, so taking the temperature of the room.
Exactly. So the facilitator presents these 4 roles to the team.
Okay, and what are the roles like?
So explorers are those who are super eager to dive in and improve things. Shoppers are open to new ideas, but maybe a bit more cautious.
Makes sense.
Vacationers are there, but not really engaged. And prisoners, well, they'd rather be anywhere else.
Haha. Oh man, I've definitely been a prisoner in some meetings.
We've all been there. The point is, everyone anonymously picks the role that best reflects how they're feeling.
I like that it's anonymous, makes it feel safer, to be honest.
Right. And just by acknowledging these different perspectives, you can shift the energy.
Because even if someone's feeling like a prisoner, just admitting that can be freeing.
Totally. It helps the team understand where everyone's at.
Makes sense. What are some other techniques for setting the stage?
Another one is called focus on, focus off, which is about establishing ground rules for communication.
Okay, so setting those expectations up front.
Yeah. So the facilitator presents pairs of contrasting behaviors, like asking questions versus making statements.
Ah, so the team decides what kind of communication will be most helpful.
Precisely. It's a simple but effective way to set the tone for more constructive conversation.
I love how those 2 techniques work together, setting the stage for both participation and communication.
They do. All right, so once you set the stage, it's time to gather the data.
Bring on the sticky notes.
Sticky notes are definitely a classic, but there's also the timeline with color-coded dots, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that one really caught my attention. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. So you create a timeline for the period you're reflecting on. Could be a sprint, a project, whatever makes sense for your team.
Got it, the time frame.
Then as a team, you brainstorm all the key events that happened during that time. Each event gets its own card or sticky note.
Things like deadlines, releases, those kinds of milestones.
Exactly. Now, for the fun part, the color coding.
This is where it gets visual.
Each person gets a set of colored dots, maybe green for positive, red for negative, yellow for mixed. You get the idea.
Okay, and you use the docs to mark how you felt about each event.
Right. So you can see how everyone reacted to those different moments.
That's so cool. It's like a visual representation of the team's emotional journey.
It is, and it helps you see where everyone was aligned, where things went well, and where there might have been some bumps.
And those bumps can be opportunities for learning and growth.
Exactly. Okay, so we've set the stage, gathered the data, we've got our colorful timeline. Now what?
Now we need to make sense of it all.
Right. Phase 3 is all about generating insights. We put on our detective hats and analyze the data.
Looking for patterns and connections.
Yes. And trying to understand why things happened the way they did, not just what happened.
So getting to the root of the issue.
Exactly. The book suggests this great technique called 5 whys.
5 whys. Okay, I'm listening.
It sounds simple, but it's powerful. You start with a problem statement and ask why 5 times in a row.
Like a curious 5-year-old.
Exactly. Each why takes you deeper, revealing those underlying causes.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, let's say the team keeps missing deadlines.
Classic problem.
Right. So the first why might be, why did we miss the deadline? And the answer might be, we underestimated the work involved.
Okay, makes sense.
Then you ask, why did we underestimate the work? And the answer might be, we didn't have clear requirements.
And so on, until you get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly. It helps you avoid those surface-level solutions and get to the real issue.
I like it. What other techniques are helpful for generating insights?
There's the fishbone diagram, also known as the cause and effect diagram.
Fishbone. Okay, that sounds visual.
It is. You start with the problem at the head of the fish, then you draw out bones representing different categories of potential causes, like people, processes, technology.
So you're brainstorming those different factors.
Exactly. It helps you visualize all the potential causes and how they might be connected.
Okay, we've brainstormed, asked our whys, even drawn a fish. So we've got some insights. Now what? It's time for action, right?
Absolutely. Phase 4 is decide what to do, and the book has some great techniques for this. One is dot voting.
Dot voting. That sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. You write each potential action on a card, then everyone gets a few dots, maybe 3 or 5, and they vote by placing their dots on the action they think are most important.
So the most dots win. I like the democratic approach.
It's a visual way to see what the team prioritizes.
Great. What else is there for decision-making?
Another classic is smart action planning.
Yes. SMART goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound.
You got it. And the book gives some helpful tips for writing smart actions, like using strong verbs, setting clear deadlines, assigning owners.
So it's about moving from we should do this to we will do this by this date and this person is responsible.
Exactly. No more ambiguity.
I love it. Okay, so we've analyzed, prioritized, made a plan. What's the final step?
The last phase is close the retrospective, which is more than just saying, see y'all later.
Right. It's about wrapping things up effectively.
Exactly. Summarizing key takeaways, reaffirming the commitment to change, making sure everyone knows what happens next.
And celebrating the progress you made.
That too. What's nice is there are techniques for this phase as well.
Oh, like what?
One is called helped-hindered hypothesis. It's a way to gather feedback on the retrospective itself.
So you're reflecting on the reflection process.
Exactly. What helped, what hindered, and any ideas for improvement next time.
Always iterating even on the process itself.
Exactly. There's also plus delta, focusing on what went well and what could be better.
Both great ways to ensure continuous improvement.
They are. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by how much these principles can apply beyond work.
Yeah, that idea of applying Agile to our personal lives really resonated with me too.
It's about taking that intentional approach to learning and growth in all areas of our lives.
Exactly. Setting goals, reflecting on our progress, experimenting, celebrating wins. It's a powerful mindset.
It is. And it all starts with that simple act of reflection, pausing to ask, what's working? What's not? How can I improve?
Such a powerful question. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have. It's been a great exploration.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for Agile retrospectives and the power of reflection, not just for teams, but for individuals too.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel equipped and inspired to try out some of these techniques, whether at work or in their personal lives.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, embrace those opportunities for growth, experiment, and see what amazing things you can achieve.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.